At my parents' anniversary party, I wasn't invited, but my handmade gift was. My sister gave it to them and claimed it as her own. And while they toasted to her, calling her the daughter they're proud of, I stayed home, watching it all unfold on Instagram. I'm Aubrey, and for years, I thought if I just loved harder, worked harder, they'd finally see me. Instead, they erased me. But what they didn't know? The man my sister brought to that party works for me. Yeah, I'm his boss. And when he mentioned my name in front of everyone, their perfect little lie came crashing down. Have you ever been cut off by the very people you kept showing up for? What would you have done if this was your family? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm listening. I brewed the good coffee that morning, the kind I usually save for birthdays or long-awaited phone calls. It was raining outside, the soft, constant kind of rain that Portland is known for. The grayness clung to the window pane while my little apartment sat warm and still. The lo-fi playlist hummed gently in the background, barely cutting through the hush. The gift sat on the dining table, carefully wrapped in pale silver paper with a thin navy ribbon. Inside was a clock, hand-painted, delicate, with our family name etched across the bottom. I'd spent weeks having it commissioned by a local artist in the Pearl District. It wasn't expensive in a flashy way, but it was meaningful, thoughtful, the kind of thing you pick out when you still believe it might matter. I had already filled out the card too, not just happy anniversary, but a few words about family, about appreciation, about how I hoped this year could feel different. The card alone had taken me 20 minutes to write and twice that to seal, because I kept second-guessing the tone. As I reached for my phone, I noticed how still the apartment felt. My plants leaned toward the pale morning light, the only signs of life. I took a breath and tapped my mother's name. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to sound casual. "I was thinking, maybe I could come down a couple of days early, help you and Dad get things ready for the party." There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of dishes clinking in the background, and then her voice, light, airy, like she was brushing away a small inconvenience. "Oh, Aubrey!" Something pulled tight at the base of my neck. I knew that tone. It was the same one she used when she didn't want to say no outright, but had already made up her mind. Before I could say anything else, I heard a deeper voice cut in. "It's better if you don't come this year," my father said flatly. The silence that followed was thick. I tried to catch my breath without making a sound. What? I managed, not quite loud enough to sound like a real question. "It's just complicated," he added, like that was an explanation, not a dismissal. I blinked at the window, watching two pedestrians cross the street with umbrellas that tilted in opposite directions. "Complicated how?" I asked. Another pause. Then my mother chimed in, hurried this time, like she wanted to cover up something that had already spilled. "Jen is bringing someone important. We don't want too much going on. It's already a bit crowded." Someone important. Not me. Never me. "Right," I said, voice flat, controlled. No one said anything more, and then the line went dead. I stayed there, phone still in hand, as if it might ring again, as if someone might take it back. They didn't. The kitchen clock ticked on behind me. I turned to look at the gift on the table, still perfectly wrapped, the ribbon lying neatly across the corner. I didn't unwrap it. I didn't toss it aside. I just stared at it for a long time, the silence settling over my shoulders like a too heavy sweater. Eventually, I stood up, grabbed my coat, and left. I didn't really know where I was going, but the rain had lightened into a mist, and the sidewalks were familiar. The farmer's market on Hawthorne was still open, even if the weather had kept most people away. I walked the aisles slowly, passing stands of tulips, fresh honey, and baked goods. A man offered me a sample of pear preserves. I declined with a soft smile. Everything felt slightly out of focus, like I was watching my life from behind a glass wall. The colors around me were muted, not because of the rain, but because something inside me had dimmed. The place I usually found comforting felt hollow. There was no dramatic breakdown, no angry texts, No tears on the produce aisle. Just a quiet knowing that whatever thread I had still been holding on to had finally slipped through my fingers. That night, I drove to my parents' house. Not to confront them, not to force anything. I didn't even plan to ring the bell. The street was empty, and the porch light had just flicked on with the dusk. I stepped out of the car, gift in hand, walked up the steps, and gently placed it against the door. The card was still tucked beneath the ribbon. No note explaining it, no demand, just the gift as it was. I stood there for a moment longer, listening to the sound of wind moving through the branches, the faint hum of a neighbor's dryer spinning, the quiet peace of a decision already made. Then I turned, walked back to my car, and drove away. I never looked back. My coffee had gone cold by the time I realized I hadn't taken a single sip. It sat on the counter, half full, the same way it had an hour ago when I first poured it. The rain outside hadn't let up. It tapped steadily against the kitchen window like it was trying to get my attention, but my eyes were locked on the glow of my phone screen. Instagram was open. I hadn't meant to scroll. It was just habit, thumb-grazing glass, muscle memory leading the way while my mind wandered. But now, here I was stuck. Photo after photo. Balloons, champagne flutes, fairy lights strung across the rented hall, tables covered in linens and catered dishes, familiar faces frozen in frames of joy, smiling, toasting. My mother's favorite lilies arranged behind the cake, a banner in the background, Happy 35th, Margaret and Edward. I knew that space. I had helped decorate that hall 3 years ago for Jenna's engagement party. I recognized every corner. The layout hadn't changed. Neither had the faces, just the stories being told. Swipe. A new photo loaded. Jenna, radiant in a champagne-colored dress, held the clock in her hands. My clock. The one I had picked out, commissioned, wrapped. The caption read, "So thoughtful of Jenna to custom order this beautiful keepsake. Such a perfect gift for Mom and Dad." I blinked once, then again. There it was, my handwriting on the card barely visible in the corner, folded beneath the ribbon. I felt a slow wave roll through my chest, not sharp, just steady, like water seeping through a crack in the foundation. The kind of pain that doesn't scream. It lingers. I swiped again. Couldn't ask for a better daughter. So proud of Jenna. She made the whole night so special. The words stacked on top of each other, one line at a time, like bricks in a wall I hadn't realized they were building, not just around me, but in place of me. Comments buzzed below each photo. Where was Aubrey? She never comes to these things, right? Probably too busy or traveling again. Some people just don't value family. I stared at the last one for a long time. Not because it was cruel. It wasn't, not exactly. But because it rewrote something I had lived. Something I had felt so deeply I could still taste it. They weren't asking. They were assuming. I opened the card drawer beside me and pulled out the envelope I hadn't been able to throw away. The one with the words I had written by hand. How proud I was of their years together. How much I hoped this year could be different. I hadn't signed it with just my name. I had added a line at the bottom, one I now regretted. Maybe this year you'll see me. They never read it. I was sure of that now. I set the envelope down next to the untouched mug and pushed both slightly away, like they burned to touch. My fingers hovered over the phone again. More notifications, more photos, more comments. One stood out, Aunt Claire. Never one for drama, but always precise. She had commented on a group shot. "Looks like a beautiful night, but where's Aubrey?" No one replied. I imagined the quiet shuffle on the other end, the subtle glance exchanged before someone changed the subject. That's how it always went. Truth was, this wasn't new. It just hadn't been this loud before. I stood up, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor, and walked toward the bookshelf in my bedroom. From the lowest shelf, I pulled out a thick blue fabric-covered album. The binding was worn, the edges fraying slightly. My name was etched in small gold letters on the corner, Aubrey D. It had been a graduation gift from Claire, back when people still gave photo albums instead of shared Google Drives. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened it. Pages turned easily. Childhood birthdays, school plays, Christmas mornings. Smiles that stretched across pages, all of us younger, simpler. Then I reached the more recent years. One by one, the gaps became more visible. Family holidays where I wasn't in the frame. Birthdays I had attended but not shown. Entire pages where Jenna stood at the center, my parents flanking her like coordinated bookends. I remembered those events. I remembered being there. I remembered holding the camera, and still no sign of me. I ran my hand across one empty space where a photo had clearly been removed. The adhesive marks were still there, the faint outline of a memory no longer welcome. They hadn't just excluded me, they had edited me out, and the world didn't notice, because I hadn't made noise. I had always shown up quietly, stayed politely, and left early. Somewhere along the way, silence became erasure. I closed the album gently, like it was something fragile, and returned it to its place beneath the bed. Not out of shame, out of understanding. That was their version of events, and the world had already liked and shared it. I didn't need to show up. My name did that for me. It started with a whisper. That's how most things in our family begin. Quietly, like a thought someone meant to keep to themselves, but didn't. From what I later pieced together, the party had been perfect, at least by their standards. White canopy lights strung like pearls across the rented hall, round tables dressed in ivory linen, a string quartet playing something too elegant for background music but too soft for anyone to really notice, shrimp cocktail, miniature crab cakes, filet medallions, catered, of course. Jenna wore a silk dress the color of champagne and stood near the cake table like a centerpiece no one dared move. Everyone showed up. Cousins, church friends, people my parents only ever referred to by last name and country club. They drank white wine, swapped praise, told stories so polished they didn't feel real anymore. And through all of it, I wasn't there. But I wasn't exactly gone either. I'd been told later that Aunt Claire was the first to ask. She stood beside the coffee urn, sipping from a porcelain cup and watching the crowd with that quiet attentiveness she was always known for. She'd been the one to ask Mom where I was. Not rudely, not even pointedly, just a simple question dropped into the flow of conversation like a pebble in a stream. My mother had smiled the way she always did when someone asked something inconvenient. "Oh, Aubrey's doing her own thing these days," she said. "Very independent, very busy." Claire raised an eyebrow, but let it go. The party carried on. Toasts began. My father cleared his throat with the same self-importance he'd always carried, tapped his glass, thanked everyone for coming. He said things about marriage and perseverance and legacy. Jenna stood beside him, arm-linked with her boyfriends, soaking in every approving glance. Then came Ethan. No one knew much about him, except that he had good teeth, a clean shave, and the kind of handshake that reassured parents. He looked the part, he played the part, and he meant no harm. He raised his glass with an easy charm. "Happy anniversary to Margaret and Edward," he began. "It's a privilege to be here. I've been hearing about your family since the day I met Jenna, and now I guess I'm part of it too." The crowd chuckled politely. "Also," he went on, "crazy small world. I just started at Pacific Terrich. The energy firm? My boss is actually one of the co-founders, Aubrey Dawson. Total powerhouse. One of the sharpest people I've ever worked with." A clink. Maybe a fork hitting a plate. Maybe someone's bracelet brushed the glass. But after that, stillness. You could feel it even through a screen, in the videos that later surfaced, shaky and abruptly cut short. The air in that room changed. Not loudly, not all at once, but like the temperature dropped by 5 degrees. Somewhere near the dessert table, someone whispered, "Wait! That Aubrey?" Someone else murmured, "Isn't that their daughter?" From what Claire told me later, the expressions were something to behold. My mother's smile froze, caught somewhere between forced grace and a wince. My father's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. Jenna let out a little laugh, too loud, too quick, and reached for Ethan's arm like she could pull the words back from the air. But it was done. No confrontation, no outburst, just a name. My name. Spoken plainly, truthfully, by someone who didn't know it wasn't supposed to be said. Ethan took another sip of champagne, completely unaware that he had just dropped a match in a room full of dry paper. Later, when Claire cornered Mom by the coat rack, she asked gently, "Isn't Aubrey your eldest?" "She's complicated," my mother replied, barely above a whisper. Claire, never one for drama, didn't push, but she didn't smile either. It's funny, really. For years, they worked so hard to paint me as difficult, distant, hard to reach, always too busy or too different or too much. And yet all it took was one sentence, unrehearsed, unintentional, to undo the whole performance. That night, while they cleaned up champagne flutes and folded up linen napkins, my phone lit up on the kitchen counter. 5 missed calls, 3 text messages, 1 voicemail. "Mom." "Call me back, Aubrey," her voice said. "Please." I stared at the screen for a long while, not moving, not blinking. The name Mom looked strange and bold, like something I'd once known how to read but no longer recognized. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but the wind was picking up, sending leaves skittering across the pavement in frantic little spirals. I watched them from the kitchen window, letting the quiet settle over the room like dust. I didn't listen to the voicemail again. I didn't return the call. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry it didn't stay hidden. It was raining again, but I'd come to find comfort in that. Portland rain has a rhythm, persistent, not forceful. It softens the city without asking permission, the kind of weather that makes you want to sit still and listen to things that don't have voices. I was tucked into a corner table at Coava Coffee, the kind of place that never tries too hard. Wood counters, concrete floors, Edison bulbs warm against the late afternoon gray. A couple sat 2 tables over, murmuring over a shared slice of almond cake. Someone near the door scrolled quietly through a laptop, earbuds in. The barista hummed as he wiped down the counter. And me? I stared at my phone. 5 voicemails, 3 from Mom, 1 from Dad, 1 from Jenna, all from last night. They'd come in after Ethan's toast, after my name had dropped into their perfect little dinner party like a stone through glass. I slid my thumb across the screen, opening the first message. "Hi, sweetheart, it's your mom. I wanted to explain. That party wasn't what it looked like. People got excited. Things happened quickly. We didn't mean for it to feel like that." She paused. I could hear her swallow. Then quieter. "You know family's complicated." The second message came from my dad. "Aubrey, this has gotten out of hand. We've always supported you in our own way, but you've got to understand, keeping peace in a big family takes choices. Not everyone agrees with how you've positioned yourself." I didn't laugh, but I did breathe out sharply. Positioned? The third was from Jenna. I almost skipped it, but I listened anyway. "Hey," she started, soft and a little too light. "I hope you're not mad. Everything kind of snowballed. Ethan didn't know. He just talks. You know how people are. It wasn't personal." Then a text followed, just a few minutes after. "Since you and Ethan work together now, maybe you could mentor him. He really respects you. It'd mean a lot to us." There it was. The clarity I hadn't even been looking for. It was never about repairing anything. It was about keeping appearances intact, about making sure their world didn't shift too far from the center they'd drawn without me in it. My success wasn't shameful anymore. It was suddenly useful. That made it tolerable. They wanted me back in the narrative, as long as I stuck to the role they now had in mind. I stared at the screen for another moment. The messages sat there like polite invitations dressed in soft colors, but I saw through them. I saw what they really were. Ropes, waiting for me to tie myself back in. I didn't respond. Instead, I went to my contacts list, selected Mom, and hit block. A quiet confirmation popped up. Click. Then Dad. Click. Then Jenna. Click. No fireworks. No anger. Just 3 small, deliberate acts of refusal. I set the phone face down on the table and wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. It was still warm, not hot. The foam had dissolved into a lazy swirl near the rim. Outside, raindrops slid down the glass like they were racing each other. I watched them fall. For years, I had confused silence with weakness. I thought staying quiet meant I was letting things happen to me, that I lacked the courage to speak up, to defend myself, to push back. But this silence felt different. It didn't ache. It didn't sting. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt earned. Later, when the cafe emptied out and the rain grew heavier, I walked back to my car without checking my phone again. My boots tapped steadily on the wet pavement and the air smelled of earth and cedar. I didn't rush. I didn't hunch into myself. I moved like someone who had nowhere to hide from anymore. When I got home, I hung my coat by the door, kicked off my shoes, and lit the small lamp in the hallway. It cast a warm glow over the entryway, a space that had once felt too quiet but now felt like mine. I made tea this time. Something herbal, something calming. Then I opened my laptop. I logged into my banking app, the cursor blinking in the login box like it had been waiting for me. I typed in my credentials, clicked through to recurring transfers. There they were. The monthly deposit into my parents' second mortgage account. The insurance top-up that kept Dad's prescriptions covered, the quiet auto deposit into Jenna's emergency fund that she never remembered thanking me for. My finger hovered for a second. Then I canceled the first, the second, the third. Each time, a simple confirmation popped up. Each time, I clicked yes. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't spite. It was the act of releasing a weight I had carried for too long, a weight they hadn't even acknowledged. I closed the laptop gently and took a sip of tea. The quiet in my apartment wasn't hollow anymore. It had shape now, substance. I stood and walked to the window. The street outside was still slick, the glow of streetlights shimmering on the asphalt like ripples on a lake. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's wind chimes caught a breeze and clinked gently. I breathed in. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I wasn't their daughter. I was their backup plan. That thought landed softly, not like a revelation, but more like a puzzle piece I hadn't realized was missing. And once it clicked, everything else, every missed thank you, every request wrapped in affection, every celebration I wasn't invited to, lined up in a neat, bitter row. It was almost 11 p.m. The Pacific Terrace building stood like a quiet lighthouse against the Portland skyline. Sleek, steel-framed, most of the offices dark, but mine was lit, as usual. The glow from my monitor reflected against the glass walls, painting my silhouette like a ghost behind the screen. The rest of the team had gone home hours ago. Even the janitorial staff had finished their rounds. I liked the hush, the absence of movement. It made decisions feel cleaner somehow. My cursor hovered over the first recurring transaction, $3,250. The monthly mortgage support I'd been transferring to my parents' second home in Bend for nearly 4 years. It had started after Dad's back surgery, just until things stabilize, he'd said. But things never did. Or maybe they had, and no one thought to tell me. I clicked cancel. A pop-up asked, "Are you sure?" I was. Click. Next, private dental insurance top-up for Edward Dawson. He'd never thanked me for it, not once. Just forwarded the renewal every year like it was a company invoice. Cancel. Click. Finally, Jenna's emergency fund, a tidy $850 a month, labeled discreetly as medical reserve in her bank logs. That money had covered everything from a botched apartment deposit to concert tickets she just couldn't miss. Click, cancel, done. Each act felt like pulling thread through a deep, invisible wound. Not a rupture, just the final, steady stitch. Quiet, clean. I leaned back, the chair creaking beneath me, and stretched my arms over my head. The silence wrapped around me like a long exhale. For the first time in months, my name didn't feel heavy in my own mouth. Just then, a soft knock on the glass. I turned. Morgan, my finance assistant, peeked in. She looked hesitant, like she wasn't sure if this was an emergency or not. "Sorry, I know it's late," she said, "but you might want to see this." She stepped in and handed me her phone. The screen was open to Facebook, a distant cousin's post, one of those image macros overlaid with sweeping cursive. Some kids forget who helped them when they had nothing. A few likes, a heart reaction, 2 familiar names in the comments, Jenna and my mother. Scroll, another post, different cousin. Success doesn't erase selfishness. Some people climb high just to look down on the ones who built their ladder. No names, no direct call-outs, but they didn't need to. This was their way. Morgan shifted, unsure. "Do you want me to flag anything officially?" I shook my head. It's noise. That's all." She nodded and left, still looking like she wasn't convinced. I stared at the phone a moment longer before setting it face down on the desk. I didn't feel sad. I didn't even feel angry. They were losing control. That's what this was, and control doesn't let go quietly. I turned back to my laptop, meaning to finish the quarterly report, when a new email slid into my inbox with the subject line, "You should know this." No sender name, just a strange Gmail address I didn't recognize. I clicked it open. The body of the email was short, 2 lines of text, followed by a zip folder. "Not everyone believes in your leadership style. Thought you should see what's being said before it spreads further." I paused, then downloaded the file. It opened into a cluster of PDFs and screenshots. Anonymous complaint forms, allegations of favoritism, whispers that I had promoted people too quickly, that I was biased, that I was emotionally distant with staff, that my leadership wasn't collegial enough. At first glance, it almost looked legitimate, until I spotted the details. Names twisted just slightly, dates wrong by weeks. One memo, allegedly sent by me, referenced a project I had never touched. Another included a quote that sounded just enough like me to be dangerous, but off, like someone trying to mimic my voice and missing the rhythm. The most damning? A claim that I had fast-tracked a junior associate, Ethan Calloway, because of a personal relationship. I sat back in my chair. There it was, the next move. When the emotional hooks failed, when the narrative of neglected parents didn't land, when guilt didn't call me back into the fold, they went for my work. They had crossed into my world, and the timing was no coincidence. Ethan's toast, the party, the aftermath, the silence. I looked at the screen, then out the glass wall where the city lights shimmered through the drizzle. I could just make out my reflection in the window, calm, unmoving. I took a slow breath. "Of course," I said aloud. The words felt solid. They didn't shake. Because this time, I wasn't caught off guard. This time, I had nothing left to lose, and everything worth protecting. Some endings deserve no applause, only quiet. It was early spring when I finally let it go, not with ceremony or bitterness, just with the quiet understanding that some stories don't need a second act. Some ties don't require cutting because they've already unraveled. The air that morning was cool, tinged with the scent of wet grass and distant blossoms. Laurelhurst Park had begun to wake again. Patches of daffodils spilled bright across the edges of the trail. Ducks drifted lazily along the water's edge, leaving ripples behind them, unconcerned. I sat on a wooden bench near the lake, hands resting loosely in my lap. The breeze stirred the ends of my coat, brushing gently against my calves like a cat weaving through legs. Beside me sat the old card. Edges softened, corners bent. The one I had written years ago for my mother's birthday. The one I had tucked carefully next to a gift they never saw fit to open. I'd found it again while cleaning out my closet last week. hidden under a stack of scarves, sealed in its envelope, still hopeful. Dear Mom, I love you. I hope you know that no matter what happens, I'll always be proud to be your daughter. I just hope someday you'll feel the same. I hadn't opened it again since writing it, and now, sitting there under a sky soft with morning light, I didn't feel the need to. I didn't feel the ache anymore. That familiar longing, the desperate hunger to be understood, to be included, to be chosen, it had loosened its grip on me. Grief had finished what it came to do. A few feet away, a toddler laughed, tossing breadcrumbs to a squirrel. His mother trailed close behind, camera in hand, smiling even before the picture was taken. My phone buzzed against the bench. I turned it over, another voicemail from Mom. The screen read simply, "Can we start over?" No punctuation, no emotion. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. Some things don't require closure from both sides. Some goodbyes aren't conversations. They're quiet acts of self-respect, decisions made in the small, firm places of the heart. I stood slowly, brushing a bit of pollen from my sleeve. The card stayed on the bench. I didn't press it down. I didn't weigh it with a rock to keep it still. Let the breeze do what it would. Let it drift. Let it disappear. I took one last look at the lake, not back at the card, not at the phone still buzzing against the wood, just the water, the gentle hush of it, the shimmer of light playing on its surface. Then I walked away. No soundtrack, no audience, just footsteps on soft earth, moving forward. By the time I reached home, the sun had begun its slow dip behind the rooftops. My front door opened with the familiar click, and the warmth of my apartment greeted me like a worn sweater. Not perfect, but mine. I set my bag down by the table, kicked off my shoes, and stood still in the entryway, just breathing, not preparing, not bracing, not wondering what might come next. Breathing. And then, before I even realized it, I smiled. Not because anyone asked for it, not because I owed it to anyone, but because, for the first time in a long time, it felt like mine. I didn't leave that park with anger. I left with something softer, a kind of peace that doesn't need witnesses. Letting go didn't feel like losing. It felt like finally telling the truth to myself and believing it. Sometimes, love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when you've given enough and choosing to stand where you're seen, not just included when convenient. In this life, even silence can be a boundary and a blessing when it protects your dignity. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, I hope you'll share it. You never know who's listening and might need to hear that they're not alone.